I'm Rebecca Hamilton, the State Librarian for Louisiana, and welcome to the 10th Annual Louisiana Book Festival and the Louisiana Writer Award Ceremony. The Louisiana Writer Award is given annually by the Louisiana Center for the Book in the State Library to recognize the outstanding contribution of the literary and intellectual life of Louisiana, exemplified by the recipient's body of work. Past recipients include poets Yusef Komunyakaa and William J. Smith, historian Carl Brasso, novelist James Lee Burke, Ernest Gaines, Shirley Ann Grau, Elmore Leonard, Tim Gautreaux, Valerie Martin, James Wilcox, and John Bigonnet, scholar Lewis P. Simpson, and children's author William Joyce. We are pleased this year to add to this honor roll Louisiana author Christine Wiltz as our 14th honoree. To be born in New Orleans is simply a terrific piece of luck. But then every person you meet anywhere has a story they'd like to tell you, Chris has said. In New Orleans, they don't hesitate. This is a city where creativity flourishes, from the downtown art scene to the dialogues you overhear in the grocery store. To present the 2013 Louisiana Writer Award, I'm pleased to introduce Lieutenant Governor Jay Darden.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, and let me first thank you and Jim for the great job that you do every year to make this Louisiana Book Festival the success that it is and the attraction that it is for people from all over Louisiana and really all over the country. So, Jim, Rebecca, thanks for what you do. One of our former winners of this award, and several of them are here today, they tend to come back and want to continue to be a part of this book festival. One of our previous winners, James Lee Burke, is one of my favorite authors, and he had an interesting way of describing New Orleans before the storm. It's not quite as funny now as it was before the storm, but in one of his novels he said, New Orleans is not a city, it's an outdoor insane asylum situated on top of a giant sponge. But I think more descriptively and more beautifully after the storm, he said, Louisiana was like a piece of South America that was sawed off of its moorings and blown by trade winds across the Caribbean until it affixed itself to the southern rim of the United States. And our winner this year has literally made a life and a passion and a career out of writing about her native city, New Orleans, just as so many of our Louisiana writers have written about their love and their ability to capture everything that makes Louisiana special and makes Louisiana unique. Christine Wiltz is the author of 5 novels, all set in New Orleans. She's also written numerous articles and essays that have appeared in the New Yorker, the Los Angeles Times, and Louisiana Life. After she read Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye, she was inspired to write about New Orleans the way that Chandler wrote about Los Angeles. The result was The Killing Circle, her first book writing endeavor that grew into a mystery trilogy that also includes A Diamond Before You Die and The Emerald Lizard. Christine's novel Glass House is based on the true story of a police officer who was murdered near one of the most violent housing projects in New Orleans. Another one of her works, in fact I have to say my favorite, I hate to admit this, but The Last Madam, A Life in the New Orleans Underworld, is based upon interviews with more than 100 people, including Norma Wallace, who was the operator of the infamous New Orleans in French Quarter House of Ill Repute. Her latest novel is Shoot the Money, and obviously all of her efforts capture the essence of what New Orleans is all about, what makes New Orleans unique in a setting that is classic Louisiana and classic New Orleans. And today she joins a long list of extremely talented Louisianians who have written about their state, written about life and life's experiences in general, and brought a great deal of pride not only to Louisiana but to the American literary scene. So it's my honor and privilege to present the 2013 Louisiana Writer Award to Christine Wiltz, and going with it as an honorarium, which I know she will be happy to receive, as well as this beautiful plaque, which I will now present her. Christine, congratulations.
It is. Let me not draw. I was very excited because my publisher thought it would be a great idea for us to have the logo of the Louisiana Book Festival put on the cover. We have a new cover to celebrate this event of Shoot the Money, and to put this beautiful logo on the cover. So it's there, and I love it. I want to thank Rebecca very much, Rebecca Hamilton, who's our state librarian, and Lieutenant Governor Jay Darden. Thank you so much. The Lieutenant Governor's office, of course, takes care of tourism and recreation and culture, and has a lot to do with all of that. And I don't know how many of you might know this, but the book festival got in trouble at one point, and the Lieutenant Governor promised in one of his in several of his campaign speeches, that he would bring it back. And I know we're sitting here in a room full of book lovers, and I'll bet every single one of us really is glad that you did that. Thank you. This is a great event, and I would like to thank the Louisiana State Library and the Louisiana Center for the Book for honoring me and my work with the 2013 Louisiana Writer Award. I love libraries, and it's particularly gratifying to accept this award from our state library. Libraries have been important to me since I was a kid. When I was about 7 or 8, maybe, my mother sent me to a summer camp, probably not more than 2 weeks. It seemed like forever. And I came back and I said to her, "I'm never doing that again." And she said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to go to Ladder Library over on St. Charles Avenue." And she said, "They don't have a summer camp." I said, "But they have everything I need." And after that, that was my summer camp, was Ladder Library. So I am also quite thrilled to be standing here where 13 of Louisiana's best writers have stood, many of whom are my friends, and all of whom I greatly respect. I met Valerie Martin, the 2010 recipient, when we were young writers with young children. We raised children, we wrote books, we read each other's work, we lived the writing life. We took trips to New York. I have so many wonderful memories of that time. It's great. And then I met James Lee Burke at the Popular Culture Convention in 1987. His first Dave Robichaux novel was just out, The Neon Rain. Years of friendship later, we evacuated to his house in New Iberia for Katrina. He told us to open it up to anyone who needed a place, especially writers. So we went through Rita with a house full of writers: Moira Crone, Roger Kamenetz, and their daughter Anya, Jason Berry, Melanie McKay amongst them. I spent a day with Ernest Gaines during a Tennessee Williams Festival, driving him to the schools that he had so generously agreed to go to and talk with students. It just so happened that it teemed rain, and we were forced to take an extra long lunch break, which we did at the Café des Gars over on Esplanade. We talked about writing and life and the two great loves of our lives, Diane and Joe. This is one of my absolute best memories of the writing life. Sitting with a master who is so full of humanity that it just pours out onto the page in front of him, where he then miraculously turns it into some of the best Louisiana stories ever written. There is another reason I'm happy to be here in the House chambers today. My esteemed relative, Louis Alfred Wiltz, was once governor of Louisiana. This was during the difficult years of Reconstruction. He was Speaker of this House after the war, and then he became mayor of New Orleans. It took him 2 years. Now, y'all are going to really appreciate this story. It took him 2 years to actually physically occupy the office of the mayor, because the Republican incumbent had decided that the election was bogus, and he refused to vacate the office. Finally, 2 years later, Louis Alford stormed the office and took it by force. After his mayoral term, he was elected governor of Louisiana, but he was accused of being a corrupt governor with a corrupt administration. And it's true that the state treasurer, Edward Burke, had embezzled over $1.5 million of state funds and ended up absconding with all of it to Honduras. But that was after Louis died. Louis Alford died. And Louis died of tuberculosis before he had served even 2 years of his term. I offer you proof that he was not just another corrupt Louisiana politician. People, he died penniless. What politician dies penniless? Anyway, he told his family as they stood around his deathbed that they should not become politicians. Anyway, with that, I exonerate my esteemed relative Louis Alfred Wiltz and redeem his reputation. I am also doing a bit of research to see if Edward Burke is possibly related to James Lee Burke. Ever since I wrote my first novel, I've thought about what it means to be a writer of a particular place. That's because I wanted to be a writer of a particular place from the very beginning. I didn't want to run off to Paris to write the great American novel. I wanted to write about home, the places where my family was from, New Orleans and southern Louisiana. I didn't want to be known, though, as a Southern writer because the South I knew, southern Louisiana, wasn't quite like anything else in the South I'd ever seen. I wanted to be a Louisiana writer or a New Orleans writer, either one or both. I read as many books as I could by writers who had made places their very own. Like, how did Raymond Chandler make Los Angeles into Chandler's Los Angeles? And what made Eudora Welty a Mississippi writer? I had an uncle, Uncle Julian, who, like so many Louisianians, was a natural-born storyteller. He could take a walk, and when he came back, he made that walk and the people he encountered on it your entire world for at least a quarter of an hour. He never lost you. He never made you raise your eyebrows and say, "Oh, come on." You might know the place he was describing, even some of the people, but when Uncle Julian told his story, the place was his. It was recognizable, but it was different. Something new was there. The way he put his words together, the details he chose. That's what caught your imagination. Forever, it was Uncle Julian's story. But the dangers of description and local color became apparent to me before I was halfway through my first book. I had chosen to write a mystery, so I had my plot to hold on to. But it wasn't until the second and third books in the trilogy that had been written and rewritten that I finally felt I had gotten below the crust of familiarity and the over-familiar that was, and that it was finally within grasping distance of the very heart and soul of the place and the people. Susan Larson, who, so far as I'm concerned, is the last word on everything literary, says my themes are sex, money, and power. When she told me that, I gave her the raised eyebrows. But once I started writing The Last Madam, I saw those themes all coming together in the story of this amazing woman's life, Norma Wallace. I interviewed over 100 people, and afterwards I had enough characters and stories for another book. Those people now, not in Norma Wallace's time, and my interactions with them couldn't, of course, become part of The Last Madam. But how badly I wanted to tell that when I met Freddie Soule for breakfast at his local McDonald's, this is the former head of Vice who finally busted Norma after she eluded police for 40 years, that he made me sit with my back to the door. And Sidney Scallon, the ex-husband of Rosemary Miorana, who was one of Norma's girls very briefly, who instead became like a daughter to her and her best friend. I went to Angola to see Sidney. He pointed out various members of the Dixie Mafia, and then he asked if he could hold my hand because it had been so long since he'd touched another human being. He was clutching both of my hands by the time he got to the part of the story where he had become a hitman. He said if I divulged any of it, he would have me killed. Rosemary had told me that if he liked me, his nostrils would flare. He said, "I'll have to have you killed." And he smiled, and his nostrils flared. Frank Bertuzzi, maybe one of my favorite characters of all. He was the aide to 5 mayors, most significantly Chet Morrison, who was well known for being quite the ladies' man. Frank's political stories were mesmerizing. On the night, he told me, of one of the big Mardi Gras balls, he went up to Morrison's apartment in the municipal auditorium to lay out his clothes for him. But it was pitch black when he entered. The next thing, a gun was shoved into his back, and a woman said, "I'm going to kill you, Shep." Shep was a real player, which Frank said he couldn't understand. He loved Shep's wife. And he would say, "I don't get it. Why did he go out for hamburger when he had filet mignon at home?" After The Last Madam, I went back to writing fiction, and I did not find it an easy switch. I wrote 100 pages of 3 different novels, the last one historical, thinking that that one would work because I was still hungering after the facts. I missed the New Orleans of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. But what I really wanted wasn't facts, but a new way to tell a story, a new style, something that both reflected The Last Madam yet went beyond it. I was extremely fortunate to be the writer who wrote The Last Madam. I didn't search it out, it fell in my lap, and I nearly rejected the idea of doing it. But from the beginning of my life as a professional writer, I wanted to write a book about my home that would define it and make it live, and indeed The Last Madam has found a permanent place in the body of New Orleans literature. That makes me one very proud and very lucky writer. The Last Madam changed me as a person and as a writer. There was no going back, but I couldn't move forward either. I was struggling to find some stable ground, and along came Katrina. Louisiana has always attracted writers and artists. It's an easygoing place that likes its artists and treats them with the utmost respect. It takes them seriously, but they love it when you make them laugh, too. After Katrina and Rita, the floods seemed to have brought in a wave of creative people. Not all of them had savory plans. And I'll admit that those opportunists captured my imagination. But more artists are coming. Writers, visual artists, movie people. Louisiana is changing. It's becoming more sophisticated and in the case of at least New Orleans, more expensive. Things we may not like, but not anything that we have any real control over. We can't be changed. What cannot be changed are our people and our customs and our culture, at least not very quickly. And we must guard against outsiders coming in and using our culture to paint us in stereotypes we know we are not. What Katrina did for me personally was give me a gigantic shove, a swift kick of change and the impetus to find a different way to write about this new place. I pulled out one of the 3 unfinished manuscripts, along with my themes of sex, money, and power, and wrote a novel set in this new post-Katrina world. That book is Shoot the Money. I did not want it to be a big, dire Katrina novel. We had had a lot of big books about Katrina, many of them very fine pieces of work. I thought people might need a laugh along with their dose of the new world. that no matter what else it is, it's still home, peopled by Louisianians who are resilient, have a great love of life and laughter, and who still tell the best stories anywhere. Many people have been supportive of me and my work over the past 40 years of my writing life. I thank them all, and I especially want to thank 3 people who have been very important in my writing life and life in general, which, believe me, helps the writing life a lot. First is an extremely talented writer herself, the author of a new edition of The Book Lover's Guide to New Orleans, Susan Larson. Susan, besides being the greatest champion of books, readers, and writers I have ever known, you have, since the beginning of your 21-year career as the Times-Picayune book editor, and now through your radio show, The Reading Life, and the books you have written, you have been the glue that holds this writing community together. It is your work that made us realize we are, indeed, a writing community, and that sense of community has helped make us a force to be reckoned with. Joe Pecco and Marini Goodyear, my husband and my daughter, are the other 2 people I want to thank. I wish Marini could be here today. She and Joe have been supportive of me through the best and worst of times. Joe, you have believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You told me to burn through the doubt. You showed me a way of being in the world that started many years ago when I recognized that you really are a Zen fisherman. You also introduced me to the Louisiana marshland, which I love and where I find great inspiration, as well as Southwest Louisiana, where you were born. Thank you so much for your love and for sharing this weird and wonderful life with me. I love you very much. Thank you all. I am incredibly honored to be here because I have been chosen as the recipient of the Louisiana Writer Award for 2013.
Wow.
I can't tell you how thrilled and pleased I am, how honored I feel, really do. Joining a list of writers that are pretty awesome. And also, it means a lot to me personally to be known as a Louisiana writer. I never wanted to be a Southern writer. I either wanted to be a Louisiana writer or a New Orleans writer. Either of those, both of those. And I feel like this really does it. I'm now officially a Louisiana writer.
What is so special about Louisiana to you in the writing?
Well, I think this place has a charm and a character about it that is, as many places are, unique. Mm-hmm. But, for example, southern Louisiana, which is the part of it I know the best. I know a little bit about the north. But one of the reasons I didn't want to be a southern writer is because this part of the South, to me, is nothing like any other part of the South I've ever seen. It's got its own customs, and its people are they're different. They do things differently. They have other interests. They've got amazing cultural traditions, and I think that that's a real gift to a writer, to be born in a place that you grow up knowing this. It'd be very hard to learn it all and to understand it well enough to write about it if you just kind of walked into it as an adult, I think. I wouldn't even want to try.
Well, what books are you reading right now?
Oh, what am I reading right now? Well, actually, I'm reading for a contest, so I'm reading a bunch of debut novel mysteries. But I try to keep up with the books that are coming out of Louisiana, especially the writers that I know and love here. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy that, and then just keeping up with fiction in general. Let's see, what was the last one I read? Rage Against Dying by a woman named Becky Masterson. But it's not a Louisiana novel.
What advice would you give for someone who wants to write?
Well, I don't think anybody ever said it better than Ernest Gaines did, who is one of my real heroes in this business or art or whatever you want to call it. It's all of those things. He said, if you want to write, read, 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 and then write, write, write. And I think that's correct. That is what you need to do.